The Apalachicola River is the end of great waterways that begin in the mountains of North Georgia and Alabama. Its history is as exciting as its scenic beauty. We'll take a trip on the river today on Florida Naturally. Hi, I'm Carolee Boyles Sprinkle. Today we're on the upper Apalachicola River with Don Humphrey, just south of the dam. Don, what are you going to show us today?
Well, we're going to be looking at the upper Apalachicola River from here at Jim Woodruff Dam down to the Bluntstown area. In the area that we're in here right below Jim Woodruff, the Apalachicola River begins. Just a short distance north of the dam here, the Chattahoochee and the Flint River come together to make the Apalachicola River. The Flint River rising near the Atlanta International Airport, the Chattahoochee River rising in northern part of Georgia there, northeast Georgia. These two rivers drain the majority of the state of Georgia. Also, the Chattahoochee drains a large portion of the state of Alabama. Jim Woodruff Dam was completed in 1957. The main purpose, as I understand it, was to improve navigation, electrical power, and for recreation. Today we'll be moving on down the river and looking. This river is a very historical place in the state of Florida as well as the state of Georgia and Alabama. We must remember today that this was the center of transportation. People living on this river in the 1800s, all of their goods were delivered to them by paddle wheel on this river. It was the main avenue of transportation. When one left this part of the country going north to the metropolitan areas of Chicago, New York, it was down this river on a paddle wheel to Appalach, catch a sailing vessel around the tip of Florida and up the coast of the United States. So if you'd like to at this time, we'll move on down the river and stop at some of these sites.
Sounds good.
All right, we're at Asperlagi Bluff. We're about a mile below I-10 crossing, about 7 to 8 miles below the Jim Woodruff Dam. Right now, the water is somewhat high due to the seasonal rains that we've had this week. Jim Woodruff, the water level is somewhere about 47 feet above sea level. This bluff, Asperlagi Bluff, is many places in history of Florida. The old Smithfield mounds are on top of it, and these mounds have produced from past excavations some of the oldest artifacts found in Florida. It once thought to be just a seasonal stopover for Indians, possibly a wintering site for the Indians of North Georgia and Alabama, but after extensive excavation there, they found that due to the size and the materials that they found, that it was a year-round village and one of great size. Also, kind of point of interest and of humor too, in the years of the paddle wheel on this river, there was a lady known as the Apalachicola River gal, lady of the night. And in passing, she always made the comment, when I die, I want to be buried on this bluff, Asperlagi Bluff. And indeed she is. Now, the site is not marked. It's not visible anymore there where you can find it. But many people in this area still talk about it. This bluff is unique in that you see the lime rock outcropping right at the edge of the river. There's not a floodplain between it or a levee between here and the river bluff, which is usually somewhere from a mile, mile and a half to 2 miles. So that actually you get a real increase over 1 foot or 2 of elevation. So this is unique in itself. The lime rock here, you find a lot of wild hydrangeas growing. The maidenhair fern, which is of interest to people, is growing here. Below here was one of the largest and paddle boat landing, Apalachicola Landing, named after the bluff. And now if you'd like, we'll travel down and look at that.
All right, sounds good. Is the river current always that fast?
No, the river's up. The last day it's risen about 4 feet. The rains that we've had in the last 2 or 3 days causes a violent fluctuation. This river has always fluctuated with the seasonal rains. The flow varies, the height of it varies the season. This time of year through January and through April and part of May, the river's at its highest. Now, in the next several weeks, the river will start receding. July and August, really that's when it's the prettiest. When you have the long white sandbars, you get the deep green of the water. To me, that's when it's prettiest. It's always pretty, but it's kind of between now. It's raging and it's mad stage, and it's got to have that. These floodplains have got to have it. It's got to have the flooding, the vegetation that we see around here. These trees are here for that purpose. That's what it takes for them to survive. So, you know, it's something that's got to be, and then on in the fall of the year is the lowest period. It'll really be low, and that corresponds with correlates with the dry season here in Florida. October and November and usually the first part of December, the river's really at its lowest part. We're here now at the actual old Apalachicola Landing. This is Steamboat Landing, and I think about the first recording of it was somewhere about 1830. And at that time, this was the center. This was the hub of civilization around here. This was, in this area, this was the biggest steamboat landing. The farmers here brought all of their crops to this area to put them on the paddle wheels to carry to Appalachia to sell. Some of the things that were prominent commodities in that time, or products for sale, were gum, your turpentine, cotton, your grains, and especially in that area was lumber. And they sold timber to make logs, boards for housing, and also people sold fuel, remembering that those paddle wheels ran off of wood for fuel, steamboat. So they used those. That was a market for firewood. This old road was the original road leading down to the river, seeing the river in the background. I would imagine at that time when the river was low, they had large wooden ramps that they let down on the decks to load and unload. They would load these on wagons or sleds and pull them up this road, noticing that you have a rise in elevation here on your right, and it being this close to the river, it was an ideal place for such a landing in that the high water of the river never reached that elevation, and yet it was so close that it was not a long pull for the mules and it was not a muddy situation. Noticing here that you see some of the old timbers that were hewn and hewed out and placed in the lime rock. I would imagine these were to give the mules footing, getting along this area. The lime rock, when it's wet as it is today, moist, it would be slippery. But yet that was better than crossing a large boggy wetland area, floodplain area. And you can just imagine the time that it took someone to chip this lime rock out, to place that there.
So that's very much like a corduroy road over a wet area.
Right. But it gave the mules footing so they could pull the materials up. This landing survived until after the 1880s, when the railroads really got to going in this part of the country. The trestle was across. That was the first permanent structure. The trestle there in Chattahoochee, a couple of miles below the Jim Woodruff Dam. That was the first permanent structure on the Apalachicola River. It began about 1881, and due to high water, it was not completed to 1883. And with the coming of the railroad, you had a decline in the use and the travel of the steamboat. And so you just had a general phasing out of your steamboats and your paddle wheels and landings such as these. A lot of your trees, you look fairly good size. We got to remember that probably at that time the majority of these trees were cleared, that it was cut, and that this has come back. And it's come back pretty well in its natural state. Notice the large cypress tree, very large cypress tree for this area there. And oftentimes they're slow growing. Trees on the average really grow well in this area because of the fertile, moist soil. And you've got several very rare species of trees in this area. You got the toria tree, the Florida yew, and we'll look at a toria tree. Wild hydrangea, the oak leaf hydrangea, extremely large size here. So this area and the trees and the shrubs that's in this area are really particular. A lot of things are found right here and along this floodplain that are found nowhere else in the world. Before we go up and look where the warehouses and the offices are at, let's take a walk along the bluff and we'll look at some of the black walnut trees that were planted in that time. Look at the hydrangea and the maidenhair fern, and look at a toria tree.
Right, okay? Sounds good.
You know, we think about just the paddle wheels along this river and these landings for that, but at this area there was a very large ferry, and it was a stagecoach crossing here. One of the first areas to cross the Apalachicola River. Mr. Crooms, who I believe actually discovered the toria tree, which is native to this area. This was a crossing he used, and people from Quincy, Mariana, wherever, and crossing here, they came to this site.
What's this?
See that? There's a sycamore ball, what I call it.
Just came off a tree, I guess.
Yeah, it fell off. I wouldn't doubt I don't know, I thought maybe a squirrel had cut it, but I guess not. And we'll see some green dragons along here that's of interest. The berries on them are formed now. And here it is. It's called a green dragon. And this one I don't see the berries on. I'd like for us to find one that has the berries. And on in the fall, those berries will be just a blood red, kind of like on a holly tree, and you'll be walking through the woods, and this part of the plant will dry and just droop over and look like it was a vine. Notice that the leaves are very tender and whatnot on it.
Are the berries good wildlife food?
I don't think the wildlife eat the berries too much. The leaves, I noticed that they, especially deer, graze on the leaves. I've never tasted the berries. I don't know how they would taste, but the deer really seem to like the leaves, I guess because they're so tender and you know, for them to eat. Now, the plant comes out in the early spring, and it's one of the first things that you see of green growth. So they capitalize on it. Here we got a toria tree, and it's kind of amazing to me that this tree survived here, because this wood was used extensively in making of houses and boats. It was real resistant to weather, like cypress. You hear people talk about cypress now. This wood was like that, and I imagine that this tree itself is sprouting from an old root, probably from a tree that they cut and sawed to make some of the housings and warehouses up on the hill here. The toria tree in this country is not faring well. There's some kind of blight or disease that's gotten into them, and they're not growing to any size. This is about as large as one you'll see. Some a little bit larger, but and you can see the condition that it's in.
Doesn't look very good, does it?
No, it sure doesn't. But you notice, people ask me, so how can you look at this and tell the difference between this and the Florida hue? If you grab the thing like this, you'll feel the thorns. On a Florida hue, and you grab it, it'll be soft, and you'll not feel the little thorns on the end. Feel them?
Oh, yes, it's spiny.
Also notice the odor. You don't have the odor.
Oh, kind of piney.
Yeah, you don't have that odor with the Florida hue. But, you know, I don't know what's going to be the outcome of the toria tree. Found just in the very southern part of Georgia, Gadsden and Liberty County. I understand there's some in McClay Gardens in Tallahassee. And what was so beautiful about them being transplanted there was the fact that they were removed from the disease and that they're faring well there. Also, there's 2 or 3 of them in Columbus, Georgia, that's a statue. So to see one and actually how it used to look, you can't see it in this native area. Tree of a lot of interest, beautiful tree. I can imagine what it would look like before the disease got to it. Let's walk down and look at some of the maidenhair fern that's along this bluff. Thought maybe we would see another one of those green dragons with the fruit on it. You know, it's kind of unusual. You go to shops and whatnot, and you see these things for sale, and here it is growing in the wild.
Oh, that is so dainty.
That's what it takes. It takes that lime. You see it growing to very little topsoil there, going right directly on that lime. Very moist condition. You have them at home, and the directions say mist them once or twice a day, very fine mist. And here it is, just growing in big clumps.
It's so delicate.
Right. There's a northern maidenhair, and I understand that how these lay on the flat plain, I understand that they stick up more. I have not seen it. I don't think it's in Florida. Also, here's one of your wild violets right there.
Right on the rock.
Stem, that's Viola walteri. It blooms. It's one of the few that persist throughout the year. And it's an early bloomer, and it has a little pale, kind of purplish bloom on it. Notice the size of the hydrangeas here. This is the kind of terrain that hydrangea, the oak leaf hydrangea requires. Right on the oak. Right on the lime rock soil there, growing. In bloom, and you're used to seeing the hydrangea, the cultivated hydrangea in the cities, and there the blooms are bluish or violet look, and these are more whitish to white pink. Growing right over there is a very large black walnut.
That's a black walnut?
That's a black walnut.
What a monster.
I would imagine there's several of these trees right about the same elevation along this bluff. I would imagine that they were planted here. You find black walnut in the floodplain scattered up and down, usually not of that stature. That's an extremely large one, and usually not of the number that's right in this area. So I would imagine the people that in those times back in the early 1800s planted those things as shrubbery, and whatnot, something, curiosity. But you just don't find them that size and the frequency that we're seeing them now. Let's walk around and go back up on the hill.
I'm surprised to see palmetto in here where it's so wet.
Okay, we're up on the bluff now where the warehouses were located, and it's just kind of hard for us to imagine when we look around us at the wild state that we're in, that this was a center of activity in this area of Florida. Remembering that the river's, maybe 100 yards in this direction, that being the edge of the bluff that we walked around and looked at the walnut trees and the hydrangea and the maidenhair fern. And it's hard to visualize the large warehouses, the cotton and the grain, the gum that was stored here and shipped out from this area. This area was very important for the economy. Right in here, for this portion of Florida, this was the main shipping area, and everybody brought their goods, and the goods that they reordered were received here. And they knew when the paddle wheels were going to be here, and they'd meet them and trade and sell and order and whatnot. You look and you can see that the vegetation here is second, third growth, that it's struggling, it's trying to come back. Noticing the crepe myrtles that was left, not native to this area there in the background. That's evidence of man being here. Now, I think that maybe not in our lifetime, but I think that we're going to see this area, if left alone, revert back to how it initially was. And, you know, it'd be wonderful to see it if man doesn't disturb it. Let's go back down to the river, and we're going down the river, and maybe we can find another site or two of interest.
Okay, it'll be cooler on the river too, I guess, than it is up here.
Hopefully. Okay, we're here, a quarter to a half a mile above Toria Park, on a sandbar here in a steep bend in the river. Noticing the sand, some of it left by the high water stages of the river, some by dredging of the channel. This is used extensively on this river for recreation. Back up under the willows, the tree in the shade's a good place to camp. The water drops off gradually, a wonderful place for kids to swim, used extensively for recreation. Right here adjacent are some of the low-lying floodplains or wetlands. This type land is very important to this river and to the Apalachicola Bay. And the extreme high water stages of this river, it moves the dead vegetation, leaves, twigs, on down the river and deposits them in the Apalachicola Bay. And for the oyster industry and for productivity of that bay to exist, it depends pretty well solely on this river and the fluctuation, the high stages of this river to bring the nutrients to the Apalachicola Bay. Here in the background, we can see the bluffs of Toria Park. Just around that bend is the old Gregory House. A lot of times not noted or discussed is in this area to our left, behind us, kind of to our left, is the old Cooper Landing. Reading in the book entitled History of Gadsden County, in the very last portion of that book, you'll find an article there concerning the paddle wheels, and as a fellow striker mentioned Henry Hunter. Henry lived up on the hill behind us, and he would walk down here and catch the paddle wheel as it came up from Appalachia. He'd ride to Bainbridge. The next day he'd be back here, get off. 2 or 3 days later he'd have some more wood cut up to sell, catch the boat and back.
I want to see what the Toria House looks like from the river.
We'll stop and look at the Gregory House. Okay, we're here at Rock Bluff. This area was used during the Confederate War for guns, and the Confederate Army posted cannons on this bluff looking down this straightaway on the river so that any of the Federal boats that came up from Apalachicola, they're being blockaded, Apalachicola, by the Federal troops. If they did make it this far, that they would have a sure shot here and as they turned up. Also, it's kind of interesting to note that this is about the top of this bluff is about 170 feet above sea level, which is fairly high for along the river here. At normal height, the river's something like 33 feet above sea level. We can see the hydrangeas again. A lot of the plants that we see here, this river is just really unique. A lot of the plants we see here, especially in Toria Park, you see nowhere else until you get up in the mountains of North Georgia. It's like God kind of picked the mountains up and put them down here on us rednecks in Florida. And you know, we look at things you find in Jackson County, columbine, and that's something that's not found in Florida except in mountain areas. So these bluffs, the limestone bluffs, are unique. They're special. They need to be preserved for this river to function and for the Apalachicola Bay to function. Okay, after weathering this afternoon shower, we're downriver here at Alum Bluff. Looking up the river at the bluff, you can see the upper layers of sand, probably alluvial sand or sedimentation from the river itself as it eroded itself down to its present positions. You can see the darker areas and areas being left from when the sea covered this part of Florida. Those areas being full of seashells.
Doesn't look like Florida at all.
No, it looks like some kind of a waste lands or maybe in the mountains. This bluff, the elevation is something like 170 feet above sea level. The river here at normal flow something like 30 or 33 feet above sea level. This bluff also was used as a place to mount guns during the Civil War, and them being aimed down the river, having the position to shoot down on Federal boats. Then, so far as I know, there was never a shot fired. Most of the Federal boats remained down in the blockade around Appalachia.
Don, we really appreciate you coming out and sharing your love for this river with us today. And our thanks to the Northwest Florida Water Management District for providing boats and drivers so we could get up and see the river from the dam to Bluntstown.
Well, my pleasure has been mine. I certainly enjoyed it. It's been a privilege.
Thank you.